Marcus Richardson stepped out of his black Bentley Continental GT, the leather seats still warm from his body heat. The valet, a young man in a crisp white uniform, approached with the reverence that Marcus had grown accustomed to over the years. Money, he had learned, was the universal language of respect, and Marcus spoke it fluently. At 38 years old, he owned a chain of luxury hotels, 3 high-end restaurants, and a real estate empire that stretched across 5 states. His net worth had crossed the $100 million mark 2 years ago, and every day since then had been a reminder that he had made it to the top. The invitation in his breast pocket was printed on the finest cream paper, embossed with gold lettering that caught the light from the palace's grand entrance. The Royal Charity Gala was the most exclusive event of the year, and Marcus had secured his place through a generous donation of $200,000. Not because he particularly cared about the charity, but because this was where the real power players gathered. Prime ministers, ambassadors, old money aristocrats who had shaped policy for generations. And tonight, Marcus would walk among them as an equal. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment. His tuxedo was custom-tailored by the same Savile Row tailor who dressed European royalty. His shoes were handcrafted Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. The watch on his wrist cost more than most people earned in 5 years, and his diamond cufflinks had been a gift to himself after closing his biggest deal last quarter. Every detail had been carefully chosen to communicate one message. Marcus Richardson had arrived, and he demanded the respect that came with his success. Palace grounds were magnificent, even by Marcus's elevated standards. Manicured gardens stretched in perfect symmetry, lit by hidden spotlights that made the ancient oak trees look like natural sculptures. The building itself was a masterpiece of architecture, its golden stone walls rising 3 stories into the evening sky. Hundreds of luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway, each one representing wealth and influence. Marcus recognized several faces from business magazines and financial news shows as guests made their way toward the entrance. As he walked up the wide marble steps, Marcus felt the familiar surge of confidence that came with being in his element. He had worked his way up from nothing, starting with a small construction company that his father had left him, buried under debts and bad contracts. Through sheer determination, strategic thinking, and calculated risks, he had transformed that failing business into an empire. He had earned every dollar, every connection, every moment of respect that his success commanded. The massive oak doors of the palace stood open, flanked by 2 members of the Royal Guard in their traditional red uniforms. Their brass buttons gleamed under the entrance lights, and their white gloves were pristine. Marcus had read about the Royal Guard during his preparation for tonight. These were not ordinary security personnel. They were elite soldiers, chosen for their unwavering discipline and absolute loyalty. Their presence added an air of ceremony to the evening that Marcus found both impressive and slightly intimidating. But intimidation was not something Marcus Richardson allowed himself to feel for long. He had faced down hostile corporate takeovers, negotiated with billionaires who tried to outmaneuver him and convinced skeptical investors to trust him with their money. 2 guards in fancy uniforms, no matter how elite, were just another obstacle between him and his goals. He approached the entrance with his characteristic confident stride, his chest out and his shoulders back. The other guests around him moved, with quiet dignity, speaking in hushed tones appropriate for such a formal occasion. Marcus noticed how they greeted each other with familiar warmth, the kind of easy camaraderie that came from generations of shared social circles. Old money, he thought to himself. They had been born into privilege, never knowing what it meant to fight for every opportunity. That was where Marcus believed he had the advantage. His wealth was earned, not inherited. He had built something from nothing, and that gave him a hunger and determination that these aristocrats could never understand. Tonight was his chance to prove that new money was just as powerful as old money, perhaps even more so because it came with ambition and drive. The first Royal Guard, a tall man with sharp, intelligent eyes and perfect posture, stepped slightly forward as Marcus reached the entrance. His movement was subtle but unmistakable, a professional assessment of every approaching guest. Marcus pulled out his golden invitation with a flourish, expecting the immediate recognition and deference that his donation surely warranted. "Good evening," Marcus said with his practiced smile, the same one that had charmed countless business partners and investors. "Marcus Richardson. I believe you'll find I'm seated at the head table tonight?" The guard's expression remained neutral, professional, giving nothing away. He examined the invitation with careful attention, taking what seemed to Marcus like an unnecessarily long time. Behind him, other guests continued to arrive, but Marcus felt as though all eyes were on this moment. This first interaction that would set the tone for his entire evening. He had imagined this scene many times during his preparation. The guards would recognize his importance, perhaps comment on his generous donation, and usher him through with the respect befitting a man of his stature. The other guests would take notice, understanding immediately that Marcus Richardson was not just another wealthy businessman, but someone who belonged in their exclusive circle. But as the seconds stretched on, and the guard's expression remained unchanged, Marcus felt the first flicker of uncertainty. This was not going according to plan. And Marcus Richardson was not a man who accepted deviations from his carefully laid plans. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his fingers drummed once against his leg, a nervous habit, he thought. He had conquered years ago. The evening was just beginning. But already Marcus sensed that tonight would test him in ways he had never expected. The Royal Guard represented something different from the business world he dominated, something that his money and success might not be able to influence. For the first time in years, Marcus Richardson was about to discover that there were some doors that wealth alone could not open. The Royal Guard continued to examine Marcus's invitation with methodical precision, his eyes moving across every detail of the embossed paper. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a gesture so subtle that most people wouldn't notice, but one that betrayed his growing impatience. In his world of high-stakes business meetings and million-dollar negotiations, time was money, and every second of delay was a sign of disrespect. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked. His tone still friendly, but with an edge that suggested his patience was not unlimited. He glanced around at the other guests, noting how some of them seemed to glide through the entrance process with barely a pause. An elderly gentleman in a perfectly pressed tuxedo had simply nodded to the guards and walked through. A woman dripping in diamonds and pearls had exchanged pleasantries about the weather before being escorted inside by a palisade. The guard looked up from the invitation, meeting Marcus's eyes with a steady, professional gaze. "Sir, I'll need to see your identification, please." Marcus blinked, certain he had misheard. "My identification? I just showed you my invitation. It clearly states my name and table assignment. I'm Marcus Richardson, owner of Richardson Enterprises." He spoke the company name with the emphasis he always used, expecting the recognition that usually followed. "Yes, sir, I understand. However, we require photo identification from all guests as part of our security protocol." The guard's voice was calm, measured, and completely unmoved by Marcus's growing frustration. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest. In the business world, his name alone opened doors. Bank presidents took his calls without question. City officials expedited his permits. Restaurant owners comped his meals and insisted he take the best table in the house. The idea that anyone would need additional proof of his identity was not just inconvenient, it was insulting. "Security protocol," Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly above the conversational murmur that surrounded them. "I donated $200,000 to this event. I think that should be identification enough." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his wallet, but his movements were sharp. Irritated, the second guard, who had been standing silently beside his colleague, stepped forward with the same measured professionalism. He was shorter than the first guard, but carried himself with the same unwavering authority. "We appreciate your generous contribution to the charity, sir. All guests are subject to the same security measures regardless of their donation level." Marcus stared at the two men, searching their faces for any sign that they recognized the absurdity of the situation. These were not ordinary security guards checking IDs at a nightclub. These were members of the Royal Guard, supposedly elite. soldiers who should understand the importance of treating major donors with appropriate respect. Yet they stood before him with the same stone-faced professionalism they would show to anyone.
This,
Marcus said, lowering his voice but increasing its intensity. I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. I own more property in this city than most people see in a lifetime. My hotels employ over 3,000 people. I have dinner with senators and governors. I don't wait in lines, and I certainly don't get treated like some random person off the street. The first guard extended his hand patiently. Your identification, please, Mr. Richardson. Marcus felt a flush of anger spread across his face. Behind him, he could sense other guests beginning to take notice of the delay. Conversations were becoming quieter, and he caught glimpses of people turning to look in his direction. This was exactly the kind of attention he did not want, at least not for this reason. He had planned to make an impression tonight, but not as the man who couldn't get past the front door. With sharp, angry movements, Marcus pulled his driver's license from his wallet and slapped it into the guard's waiting palm. There, are we done with this charade now? The guard examined the license with the same careful attention he had given the invitation. Comparing the photo to Marcus's face and checking the details, the process took perhaps 30 seconds, but to Marcus, it felt like an eternity. Every moment of delay was a moment of public embarrassment, crack in the image of effortless success he had spent years cultivating. Thank you, Mr. Richardson, the guard said, handing back the license. Now, if you would please step to the side for additional screening, we can complete the process. Marcus's jaw dropped. Additional screening? What are you talking about? I've shown you my invitation and my identification. What more could you possibly need? Standard protocol for all guests, sir, the second guard replied. We need to conduct a brief security check before you can enter the palace. Marcus looked around desperately, hoping to find someone, anyone, who would intervene on his behalf. He spotted a well-dressed couple he recognized from the society pages, but they averted their eyes and quickened their pace toward the entrance. An older man, in a military dress uniform with several medals on his chest, walked past without acknowledging the situation. This is insane, Marcus said, his voice now loud enough that nearby conversations stopped entirely. I am a major contributor. To this event, I am seated at the head table. I have businesses that generate more tax revenue for this country than entire small towns. And you want to search me like I'm some kind of criminal? The guards exchanged a quick glance, the first sign of communication Marcus had seen between them. The first guard straightened his posture, if that was even possible, and his voice took on a tone that was somehow both respectful and absolutely final. Mr. Richardson, we understand your frustration, but these security measures exist for the safety of all our guests tonight. The palace will be hosting heads of state, foreign dignitaries, and members of royal families. No exceptions can be made to our security protocols, regardless of donation amounts or business holdings. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete powerlessness. In every other aspect of his life, there was always a way around obstacles. More money, better connections, strategic pressure applied in the right places. But standing before these two guards, Marcus realized he had encountered something his wealth could not influence, something his success could not overcome. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and for the first time since arriving at the palace, Marcus Richardson began to understand that tonight was going to be very different from what he had planned. Marcus's face had turned a deep shade of red, and his hands trembled slightly as he processed what the guards were telling him. Additional screening, security protocols, no exceptions. These phrases echoed in his mind like foreign concepts that his brain refused to accept. In his carefully constructed world, there were always exceptions for people like him. There were always shortcuts, special treatment, and recognition of his elevated status. You want to search me? Marcus repeated, his voice cracking with disbelief. Do you have any idea who goes through my security checkpoints every day? Politicians, celebrities, foreign investors. They all respect my time and my position. And now you're telling me that I, Marcus Richardson, need to be searched like some common person? A small crowd had begun to gather, other guests slowing their approach to the entrance as they sensed drama unfolding. Marcus caught sight of several faces he recognized from business magazines and society events. These were exactly the people he had hoped to impress tonight. And instead, they were witnessing his public humiliation at the hands of two palace guards. The second guard gestured toward a discreet area to the side of the main entrance, partially screened by decorative pillars. "Sir, if you would please step over there, we can complete this process quickly and discreetly." "Discreetly?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Nothing about this is discreet. You've already made a spectacle of me in front of half the guest list," waved his hand toward the growing crowd of onlookers. "These people will be talking about this for months. Do you understand what you've done to my reputation?" The first guard's expression softened slightly, the first crack in his professional facade that Marcus had seen. "Mr. Richardson, we truly apologize for any inconvenience, but these measures are in place for everyone's safety. The sooner we complete the screening, the sooner you can join the other guests inside." Marcus felt trapped between his mounting anger and his desperate desire to salvage the evening. He had spent weeks planning for this event, months building the business connections that had led to his invitation, years accumulating the wealth that should have guaranteed him respect. The idea of walking away was unthinkable, but submitting to this treatment felt like a betrayal of everything he believed about his place in the world. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, "but I want you to know that this is completely unacceptable. I will be speaking to your supervisors about this treatment. I know people in government, people with real authority, who will be very interested to hear how major donors are being treated at royal events." The guards led Marcus to the screening area, where a third member of the royal guard waited with a metal detector wand and a small table for personal items. This guard was older than the other two, with gray hair visible beneath his ceremonial hat and more decorations on his uniform. His presence suggested seniority, experience, and perhaps most importantly, to Marcus, someone who might recognize the mistake being made. "Good evening, Mr. Richardson," the senior guard said with professional courtesy. "I'm Sergeant Major Williams. I understand you have concerns about our security procedures." Marcus seized the opportunity to speak with someone who might have actual authority. "Yes, Sergeant Major, I certainly do. I've donated $200,000 to this charity. I own Richardson Enterprises, one of the largest private companies in the state. I employ thousands of people and pay more in taxes than most corporations. Yet I'm being treated like I'm some kind of security threat." Sergeant Major Williams nodded thoughtfully, giving Marcus hope that finally someone understood the situation. "I see. And you feel that your business success and generous donation should exempt you from the security screening that every other guest receives tonight?" "Well, yes," Marcus said, though he suddenly felt less confident about how reasonable his position sounded when stated so directly. "People of my stature typically receive different treatment. It is security clearances for government buildings. I've been to private dinners with foreign ambassadors. This level of screening is unnecessary and frankly insulting." "Psst," the sergeant major glanced toward the main entrance, where Marcus could see other guests continuing to arrive and pass through their own security checks with quiet dignity. A woman who Marcus recognized as a Supreme Court justice submitted to the metal detector without complaint. An elderly man with diplomatic license plates allowed the guards to examine his briefcase with patient courtesy. "Mr. Richardson," the sergeant major said, his voice taking on a tone that was both respectful and unmistakably firm. "Tonight this palace will host the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, 3 foreign ambassadors, 2 Nobel Prize winners, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and several members of royal families from around the world. Every single one of those individuals has passed through the same security screening you're being asked to complete." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the implications of the sergeant major's words sank in. The Prime Minister had been searched. Nobel Prize winners had submitted to metal detectors. Foreign royalty had emptied their pockets for inspection. And here he was, a businessman from the American Midwest, demanding special treatment that had not been granted to heads of state. I didn't realize," Marcus stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "But surely you can understand my position. I'm not used to being treated like ... double quotes like everyone else." The sergeant major finished gently. "Mr. Richardson, wealth is a wonderful thing, and your business success is commendable. But tonight, Inside these walls, there are different measures of worth. Here, we measure people by their character, their dignity, and their respect for others. Marcus looked around the screening area, suddenly seeing it through different eyes. The guards weren't trying to humiliate him or demonstrate their power. They were simply doing their job, protecting everyone in the palace with the same professional standards, regardless of bank account balances or social status. "The Prime Minister didn't complain about the search?" Marcus asked quietly. "He thanked us for taking security seriously," the sergeant major replied. "He said it made him feel safer knowing that everyone in the room had been properly screened." Marcus felt a wave of shame wash over him as he began to understand how his behavior must have appeared to everyone watching. While world leaders had accepted security screening with grace and dignity, he had thrown what amounted to a public tantrum because he felt his money entitled him to special treatment. The realization was bitter. But it was also the first genuine learning moment Marcus had experienced in years. In his world of business success and financial achievement, he had forgotten that there were other ways to measure a person's worth, other forms of power that money could not buy or influence. He looked at the sergeant major, then at the two guards, who had been patiently trying to do their job despite his resistance. For the first time since arriving at the palace, Marcus Richardson felt something he hadn't experienced since his early struggling days: genuine humility. Marcus stood in the screening area, his expensive tuxedo feeling suddenly heavy on his shoulders. The weight of his own behavior pressed down on him like a physical force, and he found himself looking at the three royal guards with new eyes. These were not obstacles to be overcome or people to be impressed with his wealth. They were professionals doing a difficult job with dignity and respect, even in the face of his entitled outburst. "I apologize," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been completely out of line. You're just doing your job, and I've made it much harder than it needed to be." Sergeant Major Williams nodded with what Marcus thought might have been approval. "Thank you for saying that, sir. We understand that security procedures can be frustrating, especially when you're eager to join such an important event." Marcus began removing items from his pockets, placing them in the small tray provided. His platinum money clip, heavy with cash that he had planned to use for tips and small displays of generosity. His solid gold pen, a gift from a business partner in Japan. His phone encased in a custom leather cover that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Each item felt like a symbol of the barrier he had built between himself and the rest of the world. As the guard ran the metal detector wand over his body, Marcus noticed details he had missed before in his anger. The guards' uniforms were impeccably maintained, but they showed signs of wear that suggested real service, not ceremonial duty. The sergeant major had a small scar above his left eyebrow, probably from his military service before joining the Royal Guard. The first guard, the one who had initially stopped him, had calluses on his hands that spoke of physical training and real work. "Sergeant Major," Marcus said as the screening continued, "may I ask how long you've been with the Royal Guard?" 15 years, sir. 8 years in the regular army before that," Williams replied, his voice warming slightly at Marcus's change in tone. "And you've handled security for events like this before?" "Many times. State dinners, foreign diplomatic visits, charity galas like tonight. We've hosted everyone from presidents to pop stars. And I can tell you that the most impressive guests are often the ones who make our job easiest." Marcus absorbed this information, thinking about the implications. In his business world, making things difficult was sometimes seen as a sign of power, demanding special treatment, expecting exceptions, pushing boundaries until people gave in. But here, in this different realm of protocol and tradition, strength seemed to be measured by grace under pressure. "The Prime Minister really thanked you for the security check?" Marcus asked. The first guard, who had been silent during the screening process, spoke up. "He did, sir. He said he appreciated knowing that every person in the room had been properly vetted, made him feel he could focus on the charitable cause rather than worry about security." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. He had been thinking about tonight all wrong. He had approached it as if it were another business networking event, where displaying wealth and demanding special treatment would establish his status among peers. But this was not a business event. This was something older, more traditional. Where different rules applied and different values were respected, the screening was completed, and Marcus began collecting his belongings from the tray. As he clipped his money back into his pocket, he noticed that the thick roll of cash that had seemed so impressive an hour ago now felt almost embarrassing. Had he really waved money at royal guards as if they could be bought like hotel clerks or restaurant managers? "Mr. Richardson," Sergeant Major Williams said as Marcus finished gathering his items, "may I offer you a piece of advice?" "Please," Marcus replied, genuinely wanting to hear what the man had to say. "Tonight, you'll be dining with some of the most powerful and influential people in the world. Prime ministers, ambassadors, religious leaders, Nobel laureates, they've all earned their positions through service, sacrifice, and dedication to causes larger than themselves. Your business success is impressive, but tonight, you might find more common ground. If you focus on what you can contribute to the charitable cause, rather than what your wealth has brought you." Marcus felt another wave of understanding wash over him. He had prepared for tonight by researching the guest lists, memorizing their accomplishments and net worth, planning conversations about business opportunities and financial success. But he had spent almost no time thinking about the actual purpose of the event, the charity that was supposedly bringing everyone together. "What is the charity?" Marcus asked, embarrassed to realize he couldn't remember despite having written the donation check himself. "The Royal Children's Education Foundation," Williams replied. "They provide schooling and resources for underprivileged children around the world. Many of tonight's guests have personal connections to the cause. Some grew up in poverty themselves. Others have dedicated their careers to education and children's welfare." Marcus tried to remember the last time he had thought seriously about children's education beyond the tax advantages of charitable donations. His own education had been a struggle, working part-time jobs to pay for community college, before eventually building his business empire. He had risen from humble beginnings, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what those beginnings felt like. "The children who benefit from this foundation," Marcus continued, "they probably face some of the same challenges I faced growing up. Very likely, sir. The foundation focuses on children who show academic promise, but lack the resources to pursue higher education. Many go on to become doctors, teachers, engineers, people who make real contributions to their communities." He felt a shift in his perspective that was almost physical. He had been so focused on proving his worth through displays of wealth that he had lost sight of the actual worth he might have to offer. His own story of rising from poverty to success could be inspiring to the children this charity served. His business experience could be valuable to the foundation's operations. His financial resources, properly applied, could make a real difference in young lives. Sergeant Major Marcus said, extending his hand. "Thank you, not just for the security screening, but for the reminder of what tonight is actually about." Williams shook his hand with a firm grip and what Marcus thought was a genuine smile. "My pleasure, sir. Enjoy the evening." As Marcus walked toward the palace entrance, his steps felt different. The swagger was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful, more purposeful. He could see other guests ahead of him, and instead of seeing potential business contacts or people to impress, he began to wonder about their stories, their connections to the charity, their reasons for being here beyond social obligation. The massive oak doors stood open before him, leading into a world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers, where conversations would flow over elegant dinners and important causes would be discussed and supported. Marcus Richardson was finally ready to enter that world, not as a man demanding recognition for his wealth, but as someone who might actually have something meaningful to contribute. Marcus entered the palace's grand ballroom with a fundamentally different mindset than he had possessed just 30 minutes earlier. The transformation was remarkable, even to himself. Where before he had planned to sweep in with authority and demand immediate recognition, he now moved with quiet observation, taking in the magnificence of his surroundings and the dignity of the amazed other guests. The ballroom was breathtaking in its elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with classical scenes, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and gilded columns. Round tables draped in ivory silk filled the space, each set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light like small prisms. Fresh flowers created centerpieces that filled the air with subtle fragrance. Classical musicians played softly in one corner, their music adding to the atmosphere of refined sophistication. But what struck Marcus most was not the opulence of the setting, but the behavior of the guests themselves. These were indeed some of the most powerful and influential people in the world, yet they moved through the room with a grace and humility that Marcus had never associated with wealth and success. Conversations were conducted in respectful tones, and he noticed that many guests seemed more interested in discussing the evening's charitable cause than their own achievements. Marcus found his assigned seat at the head table, relieved to discover that his earlier disruption at the entrance had not affected his placement. His table companions were exactly as prestigious as promised: a foreign ambassador, Supreme Court justice, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and a woman he recognized as a prominent philanthropist who had donated hundreds of millions to various causes over the years. As he took his seat, Marcus felt a moment of panic. How could he possibly contribute to conversations with such accomplished individuals? His earlier plan had been to impress them with talk of his business empire and financial success. But the royal guards had helped him understand how hollow that approach would sound among people who measured success by service to others rather than personal accumulation. The ambassador, distinguished gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes, extended his hand in greeting. "You must be Marcus Richardson. I'm Ambassador Patterson. I understand you're one of our generous donors this evening." Marcus shook the man's hand, noticing the firm grip and genuine warmth in his expression. "Yes, though I'm ashamed to say I know far too little about the actual work of the foundation. I was hoping to learn more tonight." Ambassador Patterson's eyebrows raised slightly, as if Marcus's honesty had surprised him. How refreshing. Too many donors at these events seem more interested in the social aspects than the charitable mission. The Royal Children's Education Foundation does remarkable work. They've established schools in 12 countries and provided scholarships to over 10,000 children in the past 5 years alone. The Supreme Court justice, a woman in her 60s with an impressive presence, leaned into the conversation. "I was a scholarship recipient myself, many years ago. Without that support, I never would have attended law school. These programs literally changed the trajectory of entire families, not just individual children." Marcus felt something stir within him that he hadn't experienced in years. These weren't abstract statistics or tax-deductible donations they were discussing. These were real stories of transformation, of young people given opportunities that would otherwise be impossible. His own mind drifted back to his youth, working construction with his father during summers, watching his mother clean office buildings at night to make ends meet. "I grew up pretty poor myself," Marcus found himself saying, the words coming out before he could censor them. Community college, part-time jobs, the whole struggle. "I suppose I'd forgotten how much a little help can mean at the right moment." The philanthropist at their table, an elegant woman who Forbes had recently named one of the most influential charitable donors in the world, turned to Marcus with genuine interest. "What kind of help made the difference for you?" Marcus thought, for a moment, remembering details he hadn't revisited in years. "There was a community college professor who saw something in me, I guess. She helped me get a small scholarship and wrote letters of recommendation that opened doors I didn't even know existed. Without her believing in me, I probably would have stayed in construction my whole life. And that would have been honorable work too," the ambassador noted. "But the point is, someone saw your potential and invested in it. That's exactly what this foundation does for children around the world." The conversation continued as dinner was served. Course after elegant course, accompanied by wines that Marcus recognized as being worth more than most people's monthly salary. But the luxury of the meal seemed almost secondary to the stories being shared around the table. The Nobel laureate spoke about her childhood in rural poverty and the teacher who encouraged her interest in science.
"Our ambassador
Described refugee children he had met who were now doctors and engineers thanks to educational programs. Similar to this one, Marcus found himself sharing more of his own story than he had in years. He talked about the uncertainty of those early days, the fear that he would never escape the cycle of financial struggle that had defined his childhood. He described the moment when his small construction company landed its first major contract, and how that success had built into everything that followed. But you know what I realize now? Marcus said, surprising himself with his candor. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that the most important part wasn't the money I made, but the fact that someone believed in me when I was just a kid with big dreams and no clear path forward. The philanthropist nodded thoughtfully.
Us.
The real gift we can give these children. Not just money, though, that's necessary, but belief. The message that their circumstances don't define their potential. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself genuinely engaged in ways he hadn't expected. When the foundation's director spoke about their current projects, Marcus listened with real interest rather than waiting for his turn to talk about his own accomplishments. When a video presentation showed children in their supported schools, he felt moved by their obvious joy and determination. During the charity auction that followed dinner, Marcus bid on several items, but his approach was completely different. From his usual competitive display of wealth, instead of trying to outbid others as a show of financial power, he focused on supporting causes that genuinely resonated with him. A scholarship fund for children from single-parent homes reminded him of his own childhood. A program providing mentorship for young entrepreneurs spoke to his current position and ability to give back. As the evening wound down, Ambassador Patterson approached Marcus near the bar. I wanted to thank you for such engaging conversation. Tonight, your perspective on business and social responsibility was quite thought-provoking. Marcus felt a flush of pride that was different from his usual satisfaction with being recognized for his wealth. Thank you, Ambassador. I have to admit, tonight has been an eye-opening experience for me. I came here thinking I knew what success looked like, but I'm leaving with a very different understanding. How so? Marcus considered his words carefully. I spent so much energy tonight trying to prove my worth through what I own and what I've accomplished financially. But talking with all of you, seeing the real impact of this foundation's work, I realized that true success might be measured by what we contribute to others, not what we accumulate for ourselves. The ambassador smiled. That's a lesson many people never learn, regardless of their wealth or status. The fact that you're open to that growth speaks well of your character. As Marcus prepared to leave the palace, he realized that his entire relationship with success, wealth, and his place in the world had shifted in the course of a single evening. The royal guards had shown him that money could not buy respect or exemption from common courtesy. His fellow dinner guests had demonstrated that true achievement was measured by service to others rather than personal accumulation. Walking toward his Bentley, Marcus reflected on the irony that he had entered the palace demanding special treatment based on his donation, was leaving with a genuine desire to increase his charitable giving, not for recognition, but for the actual impact it could have on young lives struggling with the same challenges he had once faced. 6 months later, Marcus Richardson stood in a small classroom in East Cleveland, watching 12-year-old Maria Rodriguez present her science project to a group of local business leaders. The girl's confidence as she explained her experiment on solar energy efficiency reminded Marcus of himself at that age. Full of curiosity and determination despite having very little material support for her dreams, the classroom was a far cry from the marble halls of the royal palace. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on worn desks and peeling paint. The windows needed cleaning, and the heating system clanged occasionally, fighting against the January cold. But Marcus had never felt more at home in any space, including his luxurious corporate offices. "It's Mr. Richardson," Maria said, turning to address him directly. "Would you like to see how the solar panel efficiency changes when we adjust the angle?" Her eyes sparkled with the same enthusiasm Marcus remembered feeling when his community college professor had first encouraged his interest in business and construction. "I'd love to see that, Maria," Marcus replied, moving closer to examine her carefully constructed display. The materials were simple, cobbled together from supplies donated by local hardware stores and dollar stores. But the thinking behind the project was sophisticated, thorough. This was Marcus's third visit to the school since establishing the Richardson Educational Initiative, a program he had created in partnership with the Royal Children's Education Foundation. What had started as a way to channel his newfound understanding of meaningful philanthropy had evolved into something much more personal. He found himself genuinely invested in the progress of each student, remembering their names, following their academic development, and celebrating their achievements in ways that had nothing to do with tax benefits or public recognition. The transformation in Marcus's approach to wealth and success had been gradual but profound. The evening at the Royal Gala had planted seeds of change, but it was the months of actual engagement with educational causes that had truly reshaped his worldview. He still ran his businesses with the same strategic intelligence that had made him wealthy. But his definition of success had expanded far beyond profit margins and asset accumulation. After Maria's presentation, Marcus sat in the school's small library with Principal Jennifer Martinez, reviewing the progress reports for the scholarship recipients his foundation was supporting. The numbers told an encouraging story: improved grades, increased graduation rates, and several students already making plans for college, despite being the first in their families to consider higher education. Maria is one of our most promising students, Principal Martinez explained, pulling out a thick folder of the girl's work. Her math and science scores are exceptional, but her family struggles financially. Her mother works 2 jobs, and there's been talk of Maria needing to work part-time to help support her younger brothers. Marcus nodded, understanding the terrible arithmetic of poverty that could derail promising young lives. What would it take to ensure she can focus on her studies instead of worrying about family finances? Honestly, not as much as you might think. Modest monthly stipend to replace what she might earn working part-time, plus support for educational materials and eventual college preparation. Maybe $1,500 a month for the next few years. Marcus almost smiled at the amount. He spent more than that on wine at business dinners. His watch was worth more than 2 years of support for Maria's education. The contrast struck him as both absurd and hopeful. Resources that felt almost insignificant to him could literally transform a young person's entire future. Consider it done, Marcus said. I'd like to expand the program to support 5 more students at this school. Can you identify other children who show similar promise but face financial obstacles? Principal Martinez's eyes widened. She had grown accustomed to disappointing meetings with potential donors, who made grand promises but delivered minimal support, or who wanted elaborate recognition ceremonies in exchange for modest contributions. Marcus's straightforward commitment to real, sustained support was refreshing and almost overwhelming.
How's Mr. Richardson? That would change everything.
For these kids, are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, Marcus replied, and he meant it. The certainty he felt about this commitment was different from the confidence he experienced in business deals. This wasn't about calculating return on investment or managing risk. This was about recognizing that his wealth gave him the power to change lives, that using that power was not just an opportunity, but a responsibility. As he drove home that evening, Marcus reflected on how completely his relationship with money had changed. His Bentley still purred with expensive precision, and his suits were still tailored to perfection, but these luxuries no longer defined him or served as measurements of his worth. They were simply tools that came with his success, no more meaningful than any other possession. The real transformation had been internal. Where he had once sought validation through displays of wealth and demands for special treatment, he now found satisfaction in quiet contributions that improved other people's lives. The royal guards had been right that night at the palace. True. Authority came not from what you owned, but from how you treated others and what you contributed to the world around you. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Ambassador Patterson, whom he had stayed in touch with since the gala. Thought you'd like to know the Richardson Educational Initiative was mentioned in the Foundation's annual report as one of their most effective local partnerships. Well done. Marcus smiled, but not with the self-satisfied pride he might have felt in the past. Instead, he felt the quiet satisfaction that came from work that mattered. From money spent in ways that created lasting value beyond his own comfort or status. That weekend, Marcus attended another charity event, this one much smaller and less glamorous than the Royal Gala. It was held in a community center with folding chairs and potluck dinner contributions. But the cause was equally important: supporting adult literacy programs in underserved communities. When he arrived, Marcus didn't announce his donation amount or expect special seating. He simply found a chair, introduced himself to the people around him, and listened to stories about adults learning to read for the first time, often so they could help their own children with homework. During the informal speaking portion of the evening, Marcus found himself standing to address the crowd. 6 months ago, he said, looking out at faces that represented every economic level and background. I thought success meant accumulating wealth and demanding recognition for it. I learned that night that real success means using whatever advantages we have to lift up others. The adults learning to read in these programs are showing more courage than I ever did building a business empire, and I'm honored to support their efforts. The applause was warm but not elaborate, and Marcus realized he preferred it that way. Grand gestures and ceremonial recognition had their place, but this felt more authentic, more connected to actual human impact. As Marcus drove home that night, he passed the construction site where his father had worked decades ago, before the family business had grown into Richardson Enterprises. The building under construction was one of his projects now, a mixed-income housing development that would provide affordable homes for families, like his own had been. He pulled over and sat in his car for a moment, looking at the framework rising against the city's skyline. This was the first project he had undertaken with community benefit as the primary goal rather than maximum profit. The returns would be modest by his usual standards, but the impact on neighborhood development and housing accessibility made it one of the most satisfying projects of his career. Marcus Richardson had walked into the Royal Palace 6 months ago with authority, built on wealth and demanding recognition based on financial contribution. The royal guards had shown him that such authority was hollow, that true respect had to be earned through character and service to others. Now, as he sat looking at a construction site that would house working families rather than wealthy investors, Marcus understood that he had found something far more valuable than the validation he had once sought. He had found purpose that extended beyond himself, and in that purpose, he had discovered what real authority actually looked like. It was quiet, consistent, and measured not by what others gave you, but by what you gave to others. The royal guards had been right all along. Authority meant nothing if it wasn't grounded in service, respect, and genuine contribution to the common good.